Hi, girls and boys. It's so nice to see you again. I hope you had a nice weekend, and I wanted to talk with you about this week's letter of the week, which is the letter V. Letter V for Velveteen. Velveteen rabbit. And this is my friend, the Velveteen rabbit. Hi, boys and girls. So the Velveteen rabbit really wanted to meet you today and to be a part of a story that was written just about the Velveteen rabbit. And the title is, surprise, The Velveteen Rabbit. And it's written by someone named Marjorie, and the illustrations are by Charles. So we're going to read this story today, and it's one of my most favorite books, and I hope it becomes one of yours too. It's the story of the Velveteen Rabbit. Don't they look a lot alike? Yes, you do. They look just like the picture on the cover of the book. There once was a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really quite splendid. He was fat and bunchy as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen, so soft. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking too, like nuts and oranges and a toy engine and chocolate almonds and a clockwork mouse, but the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then the aunts and uncles came to dinner. There was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and the excitement of looking at all the new presents. The Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. Oh, poor rabbit. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being the only one made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys just snubbed him. They didn't want anything to do with him. Some of the other fancy toys thought that they were so much better. They thought that they were superior, and they looked down upon everyone else. The rabbit couldn't claim to be anything special. He didn't even know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself. Even Timothy, the wooden lion, he thought he was so much better than even the Velveteen Rabbit. The Velveteen Rabbit felt so sorry for himself. The only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived in the nursery longer than any of the other toys. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches, and it showed the seams underneath. Most of the hair on his tail was gone. But he was wise. He was there for a long time. And he knew that nursery magic was a very strange and wonderful thing. And the rabbit, Velveteen Rabbit, asked the Skin Horse, "What is real? Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you're made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, because he was always truthful. "When you're real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up, or bit by bit?" "Doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be really carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you're real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand." "I suppose you are real?" said the rabbit. Then he wished he hadn't said it, for he thought the Skin Horse might be sensitive, but the Skin Horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you're real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." The rabbit sighed. He thought it'd be a long time before the magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished he could become it without having those uncomfortable things happen to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of playthings lying about. Sometimes, for no reason at all, she just went swooping in like a wind and hustled toys away up into the shelves. She called this tidying up. One evening, when the boy was getting ready for bed, he couldn't find the china dog that usually slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and so she took the Velveteen Rabbit and she brought it into the boy's bedroom. Here, take this bunny. He'll do to sleep with you. And that night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first, he found it uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him really tightly. And sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow the rabbit could hardly breathe. But the boy used to talk to him, and he used to make little tunnels underneath the bedclothes, and it was just like the burrows that he used to live in. They had a splendid time together. And they would snuggle closely all night long. As the time went on, the little rabbit was so very happy that he didn't even notice that his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier. His tail was coming unsewn, and all the little pink was rubbing off of his nose where the boy kept kissing him. Spring came, and they had a long time to go out into the garden. They went into the wheelbarrow and had picnics in the grass. And one time when they were outside, the boy accidentally left the Velveteen Rabbit outside. Oh no! And the boy couldn't sleep that night and made Nana go all the way out there to try to find him. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny. You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little Velveteen Rabbit heard that, he was so happy. He knew what the Skin Horse had said to him was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was not a toy any longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. So exciting for the Velveteen Rabbit. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it. She said, "I declare if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was such a wonderful summer for the Velveteen Rabbit. They had so much fun together. And the boy even took him out into the bracken and they played in the meadow. And one day, the Velveteen Rabbit saw two other rabbits that were just like himself, but they were quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all. And they moved their bodies in a strange shape. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they came right up to the Velveteen Rabbit with their noses twitching. They were really curious about who this Velveteen Rabbit was. They stared at him, and the rabbit stared back. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" they said. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he didn't have any clockwork that helped him to move. "It's as easy as anything." And the rabbit got up and hopped sideways. "I don't believe you can," they said to him. "I can," said the Velveteen Rabbit. "I could jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, of course. Of course, he didn't want to say that. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. Oh boy, that was a dreadful question, because the Velveteen Rabbit knew he had no hind legs. He was all made of one piece. "I don't want to," he said. But the rabbits had very sharp eyes, and one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't gotten any hind legs. Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs." And they all began to point and laugh. Was that being nice? That was not being kind. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I've got hind legs. I'm sitting on them." And they just made fun of him and laughed and laughed. Poor Velveteen Rabbit. They said, "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The little boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past them. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Do come back. I know I'm real." But there was no answer. All the rabbits just left him. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day, the little boy became very ill. His face grew red and flushed, and he had a fever. He talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it was so hard for the rabbit to be right next to him. Doctors came and went into the house, and the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there hidden from sight underneath all the bedclothes. He never even moved because he was afraid that if they found him one night they might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. And then, after a long time, the boy started to feel better. He went outside, got some fresh air. They had all the windows in the house open, and the boy knew that he was going to get to go to the seaside the next day, down to the ocean. And the little rabbit lay in the bed with his head just peeping out of the bed. And when asked if they were going to bring the rabbit, he said, "Oh no, we have to put that rabbit out with the trash. It's loaded with germs." The boy can't use that rabbit anymore. So they took the rabbit and they put it out into the bag of trash. I don't know if you can see the picture of the Velveteen Rabbit. He has a tear coming down his face. So the rabbit was put out in the sack with the old picture books and a lot of other trash, carried to the end of the garden, far away from the house. That night, the boy slept in a different room, and he had a brand new bunny to sleep with. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes, but the boy was too excited to carry very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was all he could think about. While the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay outside. The sack that he was in was left untied, so he wriggled himself out a bit just to get his head popped up out of the bag. And he was thinking about all the memories he had, all the time that he had with the boy, how happy they were. And then a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, all of his memories, each more beautiful than the next. The fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the woods when he lay in the bracken. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle in all the things that he had told him. Oh, what use it was to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this. And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell onto the ground. And then the strangest thing happened, for where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any other flower that was ever seen in the garden. It had slender green leaves, the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves, a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it stepped a fairy. She was quite the most loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers around her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit, gathered him up in her arms, kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked at her, and it seemed to him he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think of where. "I am the nursery magic fairy. I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they're old and worn out and the children don't need them anymore, then I come and take them with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone else." She held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All of the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass, and when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood around in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him. Teach him all he needs to know in Rabbit Land, for he's going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again, put him down onto the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit." But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved, for when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs. He didn't want them to see he was made all in one piece. He didn't know that when the fairy kissed him the last time, she had changed him altogether. He might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind legs to scratch it. And he found he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using his hind legs was so great he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling around as the others did. He grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and the winter and the spring, and when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out of the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other one had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still shone through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his old bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. The end. So boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed the story of the Velveteen Rabbit and that you enjoyed meeting my friend. I'm going to bring him to school when we all go back and we're together again. Hi, boys and girls. I hope you liked the story. It's great to see you. Have a nice day. Bye.